The neon sign of the Starlight Diner flickered in the pouring rain, casting a sickly green glow over the Formica counter where Alara Vance was scrubbing away the grease of a 12-hour shift. She was exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tired that made her hands shake, but she didn't stop. In this neighborhood, if you stopped moving, you disappeared. The bell above the door chimed, a lonely, sharp sound that cut through the low hum of the refrigerator. Alara didn't look up. "We're closing in 5, she murmured, her voice raspy. "She isn't breathing." The voice was like ice cracking over a deep lake, low, smooth, and terrifyingly calm. Alara's head snapped up. At the corner booth sat a man who looked like he had been carved out of midnight. He wore a tailored black suit that cost more than the diner itself, and a jagged scar traced a path from his jawline into his collar. But it wasn't the man who stopped Alara's heart. It was the small girl beside him, Lyra, her tiny hands clawing at her throat in a desperate, silent struggle. The man, Kalen Vane, didn't move. He didn't scream for help. He simply watched Alara with eyes that held the weight of 1,000 sins, waiting to see what she would do. In that second, Alara didn't see the danger. She vaulted over the counter, her sneakers skidding on the wet tile. She grabbed the girl and performed the thrust she'd learned in a community center class, praying to a god she'd stopped believing in. 1, 2, 3. A piece of hard candy hit the floor with a dull thud. Lyra let out a sharp, ragged gasp that filled the silent diner. As Alara collapsed onto her knees, trembling, Kalen Vane stood up. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a Patek Philippe watch, diamond-encrusted and heavy. He dropped it on the greasy table. "You saved my daughter," he said, his voice a low vibration. "Most people would ask for money. But you just earned the protection of a man who doesn't believe in mercy." The heavy glass doors of the diner swung shut, leaving Alara alone with the sound of her own frantic breathing. She looked at the table. The diamond watch sat there, a small, glittering sun amidst the coffee stains. It felt less like a gift and more like a mark. She rushed to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Outside, 4 black SUVs pulled away in perfect synchronization. No sirens, no shouting, just the terrifying efficiency of a man who moved like a ghost. "Alara!" She jumped. It was old Pete, the cook, peering out from the kitchen. "Who was that? What happened to the kid?" "I don't know," Alara whispered, her hand instinctively going to her throat. She picked up the watch. It was heavy, pulsing with a wealth she couldn't comprehend. She tucked it deep into her apron pocket. She had to get home. She had to hide. But as she walked to the back door to lock up, she noticed something through the glass. A man in a dark suit was standing by the dumpster, perfectly still, his eyes scanning the street. He wasn't there to rob her. He was there to ensure no one else did. The Shadow King hadn't just left. He had left a perimeter. Alara realized with a jolt of fear that for the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. The next morning, the protection Alara felt was gone. She was back in her cramped, third-floor walk-up, staring at the pile of final notices on her table. The watch sat in its center, but she was too afraid to sell it. How did a waitress explain a $100,000 timepiece to a pawn shop? A thunderous kick at her front door made her heart leap into her mouth. Before she could grab her phone, the door splintered. Cyrus Thorne stepped inside, flanked by 2 bruises. He was a man who smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap power. The local debt collector for the Thorne Syndicate. "You're late, Alara," Cyrus sneered, tossing a photo of a late father onto the floor. "Your old man's debt didn't die with him. It doubled. Interest is a killer, isn't it?" "I don't have it, Cyrus. Give me a week." Cyrus grabbed her by the jaw, his fingers bruising her skin. "I'm tired of waiting. You're a pretty thing. There are houses in Jersey that would pay your debt in a single night of work. Pack a bag, or I'll let my boys help you." Alara's hand went to her pocket. She reached for the watch, ready to offer anything to stay free. But as Cyrus dragged her toward the splintered doorway, a cold, familiar voice drifted in from the hallway. "Put your hands back in your pockets, Mr. Thorne, unless you'd like to lose them." Cyrus froze. Alara looked past him. Standing in the doorway was a silent enforcer named Vane Silence. Behind him, the narrow, dim hallway was suddenly filled with men who made Cyrus's bruises look like children playing dress-up. Cyrus laughed, though his voice wavered. "This is a private collection, pal. Walk away before you get hurt." Vane's silence didn't move. He simply held up a sleek black phone. "Mr. Thorne, your organization, Thorne Debt Recovery, was bought 10 minutes ago by a Vane subsidiary. Every contract you own, including Miss Vance's, has been liquidated and shredded." Cyrus's face went from red to a sickly, translucent white. Who did you say bought it?" "The man you shouldn't have breathed the same air as," Vane's silence replied. The bruises dropped their grip on Alara as if she were red-hot coal. Cyrus's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, his eyes widening as he read the message. His bank accounts were frozen. His legal standing was gone. He was a non-entity. "You're a ghost now, Cyrus," Vane's silence said calmly. "Get out before the janitors arrive to clean the trash." Cyrus scrambled out of the apartment, followed by his fleeing men. Alara stood in the middle of a ruined living room, her breath coming in hitches. "Mr. Vane is waiting for you downstairs," Vane's silence said, his voice softening just a fraction. "Your life in this building is over. It's time to move." A sleek black sedan waited at the curb, its engine purring like a predator. The door opened automatically as Alara approached, guided by the silent men in suits. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of expensive leather and cedar. Kalen Vane sat in the corner, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He didn't look at her as she slid in, looking like a stray cat in a palace. "You can't do that," Alara said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and relief. "You can't just buy people's lives and wipe out organizations because you feel like it." Kalen turned his head slowly. The scar on his jaw caught the morning light, making him look even more dangerous. "I didn't buy your life, Alara. I secured it. Cyrus Thorne was going to sell you to people who don't have my restraint. I simply removed the buyer. I want to go back to my job. I want my life back. You have no work. The diner is closed for structural renovations," Kalen said, a ghost of a smirk playing on his lips. "You saved my daughter. In my world, that makes you a saint. And saints don't live in tenements where the doors can be kicked in by lowlifes." The car began to move, gliding through the city and heading toward the high-walled estates of the North Shore. As they passed through the massive iron gates of the Vane Manor, Alara realized she wasn't being taken to a home. She was being taken to a fortress. And the man beside her was the only one who held the key. The Vane estate was not a home. It was a monument to absolute control. As the car pulled up the winding driveway, Alara stared at the limestone walls and the armed guards who stood as still as statues. When the doors opened, she was met by a woman in a sharp gray suit, Mrs. Halloway, the estate manager. "Welcome, Miss Vance," the woman said, her voice devoid of warmth but heavy with respect. "Mr. Vane has allocated the East Wing to you. Your wardrobe has been curated, and your security clearance is active." Alara stepped onto the marble floors of the foyer, her thrift store sneakers squeaking against the polished stone. She felt like a stain on a masterpiece. Kalen didn't walk her in. He disappeared into a private study, his silhouette framed by two massive guards. "I don't need a wardrobe," Alara protested, but Mrs. Halloway was already moving. They reached the East Wing, and Alara's breath hitched. The room was larger than the entire diner. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a private lake. On the bed lay a silk robe and a dress that looked like it was woven from starlight. But it wasn't the luxury that unsettled her. It was the silence. In the diner, there was always the hum of the fridge, the shouting of orders, the chaos of life. The silence was heavy, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Alara walked to the window and saw Lyra, the little girl she had saved, playing in a garden below. The child looked healthy, but she was surrounded by three men in suits. Alara realized then that Lyra wasn't just a daughter, she was a target. And now, by extension, so was Alara. She spent the afternoon trying to find a way out, but every door required a biometric scan. She wasn't just being protected, she was being integrated into a system she didn't understand. By evening, a knock came at the door. A tray of food was brought in, truffles, Wagyu beef, and wine that cost more than her father's funeral. Elora pushed the tray away. She went to the closet, found a pair of simple leggings and a hoodie, and sat on the floor by the door. She wouldn't sleep in that massive, intimidating bed. She was a waitress from a neon-lit diner, and no amount of silk could change the fact that she was currently the guest of a man who ruled by fear. 3 days into her stay, the silence of the manor was shattered. Around 2 a.m., Elora was startled by the sound of heavy footsteps and hushed, urgent shouting in the hallway. She pressed her ear to the door, hearing the distinct metallic clack of weapons being readied. Ignoring the stay-in-your-room order, Elora cracked the door. The hallway was dim, but she saw Vane Silence supporting a staggering Kalen. His black jacket was torn, and a dark, wet stain was spreading across his white shirt. "The doctor is 20 minutes out," Vane Silence hissed into a radio. "He won't last 20 minutes. Kalen collapsed into a chair in his study, his face ashen, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Elora didn't think. She ran. She burst into the study, shocking the guards who instinctively reached for their holsters. "Move!" Elora barked, her voice echoing with the authority of a woman who had handled drunk brawls and kitchen fires for years. "I was a pre-med student before my dad died. I know how to pack a wound." She didn't wait for Kalen's permission. She grabbed a bottle of bourbon from the sideboard and a stack of clean linen napkins. She knelt between his knees, ripping open his shirt to reveal a jagged graze from a high-caliber round. It had missed his ribs, but the bleeding was arterial. "You're supposed to be in your room," Kalen wheezed, his hand instinctively gripping her shoulder. His grip was like iron, even in his weakened state. "And you're supposed to be invincible," Elora shot back, dousing the cloth in alcohol. "Hold him down." For the next 15 minutes, the Shadow King was at the mercy of the waitress. She worked with surgical precision, her hands steady even as Kalen groaned in agony. She ignored the blood staining her hoodie, focused entirely on the pulse beneath his skin. When the bleeding finally slowed and she had him bandaged, the adrenaline began to fade. She looked up and found Kalen staring at her. The predatory coldness was gone, replaced by a raw, haunting curiosity. "Why save me?" he whispered. "I took you from your home. I forced you here." Elora wiped a smudge of blood from her cheek. "Because I don't care who you are to the city, Kalen. To me, you're just a man who's bleeding. And I don't let people bleed out on my watch." In that moment, the power dynamic shifted. He saw her not as a debt to be paid, but as a force he couldn't control. The Shadow King recovered with terrifying speed. 2 days after the attack, Kalen appeared at Elora's door. He was dressed in a charcoal suit, his gaze back to its usual piercing intensity. "Tonight is the Equinox Gala," he stated. "The heads of every syndicate in the tri-state area will be there. They think I am weak because of the ambush. They think you are a vulnerability." "I don't belong at a gala," Elora said, stepping back. "You belong wherever I say you do," Kalen replied, but his voice lacked its usual bite. He stepped into her room, holding a velvet box. Inside was a necklace of black diamonds. "If you stay hidden, they will hunt you. If you stand beside me, they will fear you. Choose, Elora. Be a victim, or be a Vane." Hours later, Elora stepped out of the black sedan at the Grand Onyx Hotel. She wore a deep emerald silk gown that contrasted perfectly with her dark skin and the black diamonds at her throat. Kalen offered his arm. His hand was steady, a silent promise of violence to anyone who dared breathe in her direction. The ballroom went silent as they entered. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Who is she? Is that the waitress?" Kalen led her to the center of the room. He didn't introduce her to the lower-tier bosses. He led her straight to the Council of Five. "This is Elora Vance," Kalen announced, his voice carrying with the weight of a death sentence. "She saved my heir. She saved my life. From this moment on, her word is my word. Her blood is my blood." A rival boss, a man named Silas Vane, no relation, a bitter pretender, smirked. "A waitress, Kalen? You're putting your empire in the hands of a girl who smells like cheap coffee." Kalen didn't yell. He simply leaned in, his voice a low, lethal hum. "She smells like the life you tried to take from me, Silas." And unlike you, she has the courage to stand in the light. Touch her, and I won't just kill you. I'll erase the memory of your existence." Ilara felt the eyes of the underworld on her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. She realized Kalen wasn't just protecting her from the world. He was showing her that she was the only person in the world who could actually handle him. Life at the Vane estate began to take on a strange, rhythmic intensity. Kalen no longer treated Ilara as a guest to be managed, but as a confidant. However, the mystery of why her father, a man she remembered as a simple, failed gambler, owed so much to the Thorn Syndicate began to gnaw at her. One afternoon, while Lyra was napping, Ilara found herself in the manor's restricted library. She wasn't looking for money. She was looking for a paper trail. In a hidden compartment of a heavy oak desk, she found a weathered leather ledger. As she flipped through the pages, her heart stopped. Her father's name, Marcus Vance, wasn't listed under debts. It was listed under service. He wasn't a gambler. A voice rumbled from the doorway. Kalen was standing there, watching her with a look of somber respect. "My father worked for you?" Ilara asked, her voice trembling as she held the ledger. "He worked for my father," Kalen corrected, stepping into the room. "Marcus Vance was the lead security for the Vane family 20 years ago. During the Great Purge, when my parents were assassinated in their car, your father was the one driving. He didn't flee. He took 3 bullets to ensure I, a 10-year-old boy, could crawl out of the wreckage and disappear into the woods." Ilara sank into a chair, the room spinning. "Then why did he die broke? Why was I working double shifts to pay off Cyrus Thorn?" "Because your father knew that being associated with the Vanes was a death sentence," Kalen said, kneeling before her, his eyes softening. "He took a payout, changed his name, and went into hiding to protect you. He pretended to be a loser, a gambler, a nobody. Also, the Thorn Syndicate and the Council of Five wouldn't realize he was the man who saved the Vane heir. He sacrificed his reputation and his wealth to give you a normal life." The realization hit Ilara like a physical blow. Her struggle, her poverty, her father's failure, it was all a curated lie to keep her safe from the very man sitting in front of her. Kalen reached out, taking her hand. "I didn't just bring you here because you saved Lyra. I brought you here because I spent 10 years looking for the daughter of the man who saved me. The debt isn't yours, Ilara. It's mine." The peace of the revelation was short-lived. In the underworld, a secret shared is a weapon sharpened. The mole within Kalen's organization, a high-ranking lieutenant named Julian, had been feeding information to Silas Vane. Julian knew that Ilara wasn't just a random waitress. She was the key to Kalen's emotional undoing. While Kalen was away at an emergency meeting with the Docks Union, a silent alarm triggered. The estate's perimeter had been breached not by an army, but by a Trojan horse. Julian had disabled the biometric scanners in the East Wing. Ilara was in the nursery with Lyra when the lights flickered and died. The backup generators hummed, casting a haunting red glow over the room. "Miss Vance, we have to move," Julian said, appearing in the doorway. He looked frantic, his gun drawn. "Silas's men are in the tunnels. Kalen sent me to get you to the safe room." Ilara looked at Julian. She noticed the way his eyes darted to the camera in the corner, the one he thought was off. She remembered Kalen's words. "In this world, the man who smiles the loudest usually has the sharpest knife." "Where's Vane's silence?" Ilara asked, pulling Lyra close. "Dead at the gate," Julian lied, his voice tight. "Come on, now." As they moved through the hallway, Ilara saw a reflection in a decorative mirror. Julian wasn't checking the corners for enemies. He was checking his watch, timing their arrival. When they reached the heavy steel doors of the safe room, Julian didn't enter the code. He turned his weapon on Ilara. "I'm sorry, Ilara," Julian whispered. "But Silas offered me a seat at the council. Kalen is too soft now. He's obsessed with a waitress and a memory. The Vane Empire needs a king, not a romantic." The doors behind them opened, revealing Silas Vane and 4 masked gunmen. The betrayal was complete. "Look at you," Silas sneered, stepping into the red light. "The daughter of a traitor and the obsession of a fool." Silas grabbed Lyra, the girl screaming as she was ripped from Ilara's arms. Kaylin will give me everything to get this child back. And as for you, Waitress, I think I'll let my men remind you where you came from. But Silas had made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated the woman who had spent her life surviving the harshest streets of the city. Elara didn't scream. She didn't beg. She reached into the pocket of her gown, the one Kaylin had tailored for her, and pulled out the small, high-frequency transmitter Kaylin had taught her to use. "Is not coming for the child, Silas," Elara said, her voice eerily calm, mimicking Kaylin's icy tone. "Is already here." Suddenly, the ceiling of the safe room exploded. Kaylin Vane descended like a vengeful god through the smoke, followed by Vane's silence, who was very much alive. The room turned into a symphony of controlled violence. Kaylin didn't use a gun. He moved with a blade, a blur of shadow and steel. Julian was the first to fall, his dreams of a council seat ending in a gargle of blood. Silas tried to use Lyra as a shield, but Elara moved faster. She snatched a heavy bronze bust from a pedestal and slammed it into Silas's knee. As he buckled, she scooped Lyra into her arms and dove behind a reinforced desk. Kaylin stood over Silas, his boot on the man's throat. The Shadow King looked down at his rival with a coldness that made the air freeze. "You touched my daughter," Kaylin whispered. "You threatened my wife." "Wife?" Silas gasped, choking on his own blood. Kaylin leaned down, his eyes burning. "The paperwork was filed yesterday. She's not a waitress anymore, Silas. She's the sovereign of the Vane estate. And you? You're just a stain I'm about to scrub off my floor." The aftermath of the siege was a clinical cleanup. Silas Vane disappeared, his name erased from every ledger in the city. Julian's body was never found. The Council of Five was reduced to a Council of One. 1 week later, the Starlight Diner reopened. But it wasn't a greasy spoon anymore. It was a brightly lit, high-end community kitchen, funded entirely by the Vance Foundation. Elara stood behind the counter, wearing a custom-tailored version of her old uniform, black silk with white piping. She wasn't scrubbing grease. She was handing out scholarships to the neighborhood kids. A sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb. Kaylin stepped out, holding Lyra's hand. The neighborhood, once terrified of the black SUVs, now stood in respectful silence. They knew who protected them now. Kaylin walked up to the counter. He didn't look like a mafia boss. He looked like a man who had finally found home. He laid a simple gold band on the counter next to Elara's hand. "The world is quiet today," Kaylin said. Elara smiled, picking up the ring. "It's amazing what happens when you stop ruling with fear and start ruling with a debt of honor." Kaylin leaned over the counter, kissing her forehead in front of everyone. The cameras, the neighbors, the world. "I told you that night in the rain, Elara. The world belongs to you." "No," Elara whispered, sliding the ring onto her finger. "The world belongs to us. But I'm still the only one who can make you a decent cup of coffee." As the camera pans back, the neon sign flickers one last time, changing from Starlight Diner to Vance and Vane. The waitress was gone. The queen had arrived. The story of Elara Vance and Kaylin Vane offers 3 core lessons. Integrity is instinctive. True character is defined by how you treat a stranger when there is nothing to gain. Elara's bravery was a choice made in silence, not for a reward. Worth is internal. A uniform doesn't define a soul. A waitress can possess more courage than a king. Honor is a life debt. Gratitude should be as powerful as ambition. When someone saves you at your lowest, you are morally bound to protect them at your highest.